We're continuing our examples of section 1.4, graphing functions with Excel. We're looking at something that's not a named example, but it's extra features and graphing multiple functions. The basic setup is we've been given three functions, f, g, and h, and we want to graph two of them, and not necessarily the two that are next to each other in the table. So I'm looking at an example where f is linear, g is quadratic, h is cubic, and someone has told me they'd like to graph g and h. I really then need to select x, g, and h. I will hold down the command or control key depending on your computer, whatever you use for multiple selections, and notice that this lets me select columns that aren't next to each other. I then go to my normal insertion and do the inserting marked scatter plot like I've done before, but now notice we have x values going from -10 to 10, and our y values, well, my quadratic function is basically bleached out because its numbers are so much smaller. 11 is smaller than essentially 1,000. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to look and be able to format the data series. And in a case like this graph doesn't tell me much because they're on different scales. So I'd like a secondary axis. So now we have one axis for the y and for the cubic function, and a different axis for the quadratic function. So that's one thing to be able to do. Next, I'm going to hold down the control key, and I'd like to have data labels and know what those numbers are. In both cases, I'm adding data labels. And so I've got the values labeling the points. Now, chart title is probably a useless title. Instead, I'd like something like exploring secondary axis. That gives me a title that lets me know what's going on in this problem. I might also want to add axes titles, charts title, data labels. All of these things I can add, and I can control where I add them. Trend line is something we'll get to later. So this lets us put a graph that has two separate functions on it. It's worthwhile noting that you really do want to have x as well as the two functions. Just to explore, if I only do the two functions and try to insert the graph, notice I'm going to get a really weird graph because it's thinking the x values are what's in the column G and the y values are what's in H. And so I get a weird graph that is in H and G, but it's the mixture of the two. So remember when you're doing it that the graph we want, I need to highlight the x values as well as the G and H values. Thank you.